Not for the first time. I don't know what to say. Or rather, the truth is, there is nothing.
When I was a child, I was lucky enough to have plenty of toys, but even so, as I guess most kids do, I played with my parents' stuff quite a lot. And one of my earliest memories of things that I played with of my parents' stuff was my dad's 35mm camera.
The more I think about it, it was hugely personality forming. Throughout my entire life, I've thought about, I've seen the world through a lens. I sometimes dream in widescreen.
I grew up in the 80s, so when I say my dad had a camera, obviously what I mean is an SLR, not a digital SLR. Much like this one, but not quite the same. It had a focus ring and a split prism lens, which meant that you had two sort of semicircle ovals, and as you adjusted the focus, when the two semicircles met, that meant that your image was in focus. On that camera was always this lens. It's a Steinheil Kasserit f3.5 100mm. I've looked this lens up a bit recently and I can't really find anything about it. It's certainly no lens of great quality. It's fully manual, as you would expect from something this age, and when I was a child I seem to remember it being of, some heft and some size, but when you compare it to a more modern lens, you can see how much diameter is taken up in a more modern lens by the autofocus gubbins. When you're looking at something that's fully manual, it's actually very small.
I love the tactile nature of it, the clicking sound it makes as you turn the aperture dial.
My dad died recently, so this is my lens now. When I realised that, or when I found rather, that a couple of my closest friends had started a photo competition called Close-Up Photographer of the Year, I wanted to enter, just to try it. Notice I say try and not win. I have no expectation about winning whatsoever, but I believe in trying new things, and I haven't done much macro photography. There are various categories that you can enter in Close-Up Photographer of the Year competition, one of which is landscape, and that's the one that kind of interested me the most, if I could talk. I've done a couple of shots at home for some of the other categories. There's man-made, there's plants, but it's the landscape one that's really stuck in my head, because if you're close up, how do you take a shot of the landscape? Well, it becomes an intimate landscape, doesn't it? And right now, I can't think of any way more figuratively and literally of creating an intimate landscape shot than to use this, my dad's lens, and a load of close-up extension tubes, or macro extension tubes, whatever you want to call them. In a local wood to me, I'm at Nyman's Wood in West Sussex, which there are various National Trust properties close to where I live, and this is one of the closest. And although Nyman's Garden isn't actually open at the moment because it's about 7 o'clock in the morning, Nyman's Wood, which surrounds it, is open, because how do you close a wood? So I'm wandering around here, I've got the 100mm lens. I'm going to stick it on the Canon 600D. Vary my choice of macro extension rings depending on what the subject is, and try and get some intimate landscape shots with this lens. I've been going through a phase recently of not wanting to use a tripod for my photography. I just don't want to be set up for that long, but as I'm sure you can imagine, with a 100mm lens, macro photography and focusing for anything as close to about an inch from the lens end, I can't get away with that. So here's my tripod, and this is going to be my slightly preposterous setup. So at its longest, that's what you end up with. So 100mm lens, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 macro extension rings of various different sizes. Probably won't need all this. In fact, I'm going to start with this, which is just my dad's stuff. There you go. Let's take some photos. Actually, one of the things I had in my mind was some mushrooms. Now for macro, my main issue is that I often forget about composition. And obviously composition is important regardless of what style of photography you're shooting in this case macro. I impress myself enough that I've managed to get something in focus that I don't really consider the elements within the frame. So I need to consciously consider what's in the frame. I need to move somewhere. Mushrooms nice enough and everything, they just don't look that interesting in the dark, in the shade. This is exactly what I want, except there's no mushrooms on it. Not one. Okay, might be in luck here. So if I weren't in the way to be telling you this, these mushrooms here would be in the sunlight. Now there is a penalty for using a 50-year-old lens, and that is that optics have moved on quite significantly in that time. So it's an f3.5 or whatever I said it was, but it's really not the sharpest lens in the world. But that's not what this is about. Now, I am quite a patient man, but for some reason when it comes to photography that goes out the window. So this scene I'm looking at right now is this bit here, and this is the little spider's web that I'm trying to get. I think it's a spider's web. It might be a snail trail. Let's just say some kind of a creature has been here. But this leaf is a bit distracting. I want to try and get rid of this leaf. That's better. I mean, it's still not amazing. I am not going to win Close-Up Photographer of the Year, but I will have entered and I will have done some close-up shots. As the sun comes up, I'm reducing the
exposure time. So I was at sort of 1 and a bit seconds. I'm now at 0.8 seconds. And actually it wants even less, 0.6 seconds. And what's starting to happen is that as the sun comes in and sort of changes direction ever so slightly, the glisten that's happening off this, I think, snail trail is changing on a moment by moment basis. And so you're getting a slightly different reflection. When you get this close, things that seem to be really obvious become less obvious. So I'm so close to this now, and it's become quite abstract almost. So it's actually, apart from the little bits of leafy fern around it, it's actually quite difficult to tell that this is a mushroom. I actually quite like that. Incidentally, Merrell's trainers, shoes rather, walking shoes, whatever, active shoes, they're really comfortable, but they have got the worst grip of any shoe that I've ever had. I'm having to resist the temptation to do a David Bellamy impression. If you don't know who he is, look him up. Okay, I think that's it for this composition. So I'm just going to reposition slightly and make damn sure that all of the items of clothing that I'm wearing are wet or muddy. I'm actually going to call it a day. Because this is the first time I've been to this wood, I don't really know my way around. And I kind of assumed that sort of any path would lead me back to where I was, but actually the path that I was just on led to a barbed wire fence. I'm going to leave you with all the shots that I've taken, including the ones I took at home, and see you next time. Thanks.